So joining me today is Hattie Hawks, TV journalist, trauma survivor, and CEO of Authentic Connections. Hattie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I am too, and we've had a lot of planning to put this together. And but for our audience, by the way, Hattie is going to be a guest host on the Spirit of EQ podcast here soon. So we're super excited about that as well. But that's not the reason why we're doing this show, Hattie. And I know you know that because I am very curious about not only your background and things you've done in television and the new company. If maybe it's not new, but your company
Oh,
and what you
still.
do. Okay, all right. So I got it right. All right,
That's
perfect,
still
perfect.
so fair.
And
Yeah.
that's awesome, though.
Yeah.
And but one of the big questions for me is, so that's a pretty varied career path, life path with a lot to it.
A
So
lot.
how did you get here, right? To where so I'll let you talk, but how did you get here?
And like it's so funny because like that's the best question that you could possibly ask. Probably like the longest, most dynamic answer that I could
Right.
provide. But I'll give you, I mean, I can give you the bullet points on just that whole emotional journey that I had. I honestly don't think I had any choice in going through it. It felt like
Hmm.
some of the things that I went through now reflecting on them, I realized that I had to go through in order to get to where I am. And the only reason I even knew that I had to do emotional healing was because I was given this diagnosis of complex PTSD, and that was about a few years ago.
Okay.
Um, I had been told by my therapist probably months prior that I had PTSD, but I didn't really put much weight into it because I'd done stories on PTSD. I'd heard
Hmm.
people describe it. And while I knew that it was incredibly difficult for people in their lives and in their relationships, I just didn't really understand how it showed up in my life. I knew that I was having confusion. I knew that I was having harder time doing things that I normally didn't have a hard time doing. I'm pretty much, um, I'm typically a go-getter, really hard worker when it comes to my career, whatever it
Yeah.
is. I want to
Right.
be the best at it. And
Yep.
something was off, and so at first I thought I had ADHD, and I do, but the first thing they diagnosed me with was complex PTSD because they had a list of questions that they ask you. And it's just question after question after question, where at the end, the psychiatrist was just like, well, I really don't know for sure if you have ADHD, but you definitely have PTSD. And when she said that, she said it in a way it made it more serious to me, like the gravity of it, because she had so much compassion in her face that I wasn't expecting. Because I just, I was getting on the call, just, kind of just telling her how it was. And I didn't
Right.
realize that there was a level of life that was really no longer in me at that time. She
Wow.
had pointed out that the answers to my questions really reflected somebody who really had a bleak outlook. They weren't finding much joy in their life, even though there were happy things going on. Um, and she was able to explain some of my symptoms back to me because mostly I was just giving her scenarios. Like when I talk about, I had no idea what a flashback was, Eric. I'm not kidding. I have talked about
Wow.
flashbacks and done stories like with people who have had flashbacks, watch movies, they're talking about it. PTSD, what's the defining symptom? Flashbacks. And she tells me, well, you're having flashbacks. And I said, what? That's not what I said. And she said, what you described is a flashback. And so in my mind, I thought a
Mm.
flashback was something that you see in your mind, you remember it and
Right.
visually see it. But trauma does not come back as a visual memory most of the time. It comes back as a feeling in your body and an intense fear, and intense anxiety, intense overwhelm. There are times where you look normal You have to look normal because you're at work or you're at your kid's function or you're just doing these things that you normally have to do. But in
Right.
your head, you are not there. That's not where you are. You are miles away. You are years in the past, and you're not quite sure where that is, but it doesn't feel good to be there.
So
And
can I ask you, you
yeah,
just hit on something that really has me curious. Could you give an example of maybe a physical sensation that you felt that connects to what you just said?
the biggest one, I can tell you what my body typically feels like when I go into a
Okay.
flashback.
Okay.
And there is a big stress in my shoulders. They tend to go up. I
Mm-hmm.
tend to kind of get tense, withdrawn. Um, I'll get confused. Um, I will it'll have that feeling in my chest because that's where I get a lot of my anxiety, and I assume a lot of that's kind of like the main place where people are feeling it.
Right.
Um, but it's and your breathing starts amping up. It's if you've had a panic attack, not
Mm-hmm.
every flashback results in this massive panic attack. It doesn't. Um,
Right.
sometimes it's just like a subtle shift in your demeanor or your outlook on life or your ability to be present. It
Yeah.
it is so hard to be present when you're trying to figure out where you are. And
Interesting.
you're there. Yeah.
Well, because in our work we have this competency that's connected to the EQ model we use. It's called recognizing patterns, right? So would you say that your recognition of those things, those physical feelings, the sensations or whatever, have been helpful? Maybe not way back when, but as you've gone through the journey of healing.
I think that that's one of the first things that people have to do in order to heal, because if you can't feel the physical sensations in your body, if you can't acknowledge them, then there's no way of healing them.
Got it.
Because with PTSD, it's you have to heal through the body in order for your mind and your nervous system to recalibrate and understand that you're safe now. You're
Mhm.
not where you were being hurt or where the trauma was happening.
Right.
And simple things can be triggers. So it can be really difficult um, to process what you're feeling when you're feeling it because it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
It doesn't come. I mean, single mom of two with just building a business and like not having a family around like that is it's about the most inconvenient thing that anyone can have because
I can joke, right?
yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if life just kind of like gave you a message the night before? It says, "Hey, by the way, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m."
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're right; it's
Yes.
inconvenient, and oftentimes we don't see it coming. I mean,
Right.
it's
Some
just the
people have
way of
said that
life.
they're able to plan. Like they
Really?
plan portions of time for their healing and for their just for their reflection time on
Yeah,
their
I get that. That's very
calendar.
strategic, right?
Yeah.
So that actually connects to another thing I was going to ask you. What's a go-to for you in this? I mean, when I think of healing, I don't think like it's a completed work. It's like an ongoing thing. So,
Yeah.
do you have anything that you do that you find just kind of reinforces or magnifies the healing part?
I had to implement an entirely different lifestyle for me.
Okay. All right.
Working in TV news, it's a really like pound the pavement kind of thing. It's really high stress. You're working with a lot of different people with different stories where there are different opinions. And so there's a whole lot to manage there, even on an emotional level, because
Mm,
you can be unbiased about a story, but it can still upset you. And
totally.
so
Yeah.
you deal with all of that. And so I couldn't be in news because the fast-paced environment is not helpful to a nervous system, especially one that's
Right.
malfunctioning constantly. So I
Yeah.
move slower. I have to move a lot slower. I have to journal and I have to question myself like I would question anybody else if I were doing an interview. um,
Right.
to get to the bottom of, okay, where are you? What's going on? What's happening? Like I have plants now. They may not love me as much as I love them, but like I'm figuring that out. Like and honestly, it's some of the most simple things. You really have to go outside. You have to go outside barefoot. You have to take the time to just take it moment by moment.
Mm.
I I've known about my diagnosis since I think it was 2022 or 2023. And
Hmm.
so, it's been a few years of healing, and I still have mornings where I am processing and tears are behind my sunglasses on the way to drop my daughter off at daycare. And like I can still cry on a dime because part of it is just you are learning to live again when you
Hmm.
haven't. So it's so simple. It's stopping and petting your dog. It's making sure that you take that time with your kids where you're really zoned in and you're connected to them.
Yeah.
And you're able to put the social media or the technology away. It's all the things that we know that we need to do, but we don't all necessarily do. I just don't have the luxury of bypassing it anymore. Um,
Well, it's interesting,
self-care.
Hattie. Your this part of your story really resonates because if you would have talked to me almost 20 years ago, I would have said, "I'm sorry, I can't do that.
Yeah,
I've got meetings, I've got a,
yeah.
I'm doing this and I'm doing that." And in many respects, it took me to the place where, like you said, I no longer have an alternative, right?
Mm,
And it's
yeah,
almost in many ways, it's like I, I feel like God pulled me aside and said, you're going to be more successful in letting go than all this chasing.
yeah.
And
He was right, wasn't he?
well, right. But Hattie, if again you talked to me 20 years ago, I would have said, "Good for you," but that's
Yes.
not me, right? But
Yeah.
and I find it difficult, and I understand those that might be in that place who say, "Well, no, I'm working toward partner. I'm working toward acquiring." I
Yeah.
truly have empathy that that's where they're at.
Right.
However, I also recognize that wow, our bodies, our minds were not designed. And I'm
Mm,
not advocating don't work in a corporation, don't have a high paced job. That's not what I'm saying. It's just this dynamic of if you're only leaving the scraps to you, everybody else and everything else is getting the full meal and you get what's left over,
right.
that's not sustainable.
Mm-mm.
Just my thought. Um, so there's so much I want to talk to you about, and I'm going to kind of circle back a little bit to this idea of what we talked about with recognizing patterns, right? So, in my, I use sports analogies, hopefully not to exhaustion, but in professional sports and probably even in amateur sports, some varieties, there is this idea of game film, right? The whole
Yes.
idea is you
Yeah.
watch your opponent's film. You want to know what they do, how they do it, why they do it. You're trying to figure out so that when you play them, you are better prepared and maybe would have
Right.
an advantage, right?
Right.
Well, most really good athletes are also watching their own game film, right? What do I do when in X situation? What do I do in Y situation? So as you are navigating in your current state, your current place and time, um, have you seen any value, or is there a value to that as you're kind of moving forward, whether it be business or personal or otherwise?
PTSD or no PTSD, any adult is
Hmm.
not serving themselves if they are not questioning themselves constantly. Um,
Yeah.
from what from all of the research and the things that I've read and gone through, if you are, I mean, I'm 35 years old. So if you're an adult like, in your 30s, I would say at least by 35, if you're still having really major emotional responses to things, if you're
Hmm.
if you're doing behavior that is really not favorable or deemed as mature, then there's something that you have to question about why you're responding that way. Um, and a lot of times it's not easy at first. It's not always even clear because what you want to say is there's nothing wrong with me. I have a right to be angry about this. Of course, you have a right to all of your emotions, but you have a responsibility for your responses and reactions to those emotions.
Yeah.
And I think adults, I honestly think that we've got a huge we all do this. We all still have so much work to do on an emotional level. And so for me, I would say that some of my biggest shadow work, that's what it's referred to when you're basically looking through your shadows and trying to pull them out into the light, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And mine mostly revolve around relationships, mostly romantic relationships, but they could also, I mean, family and friend
Right.
relationships. It pops up there too. It just might not be as overwhelming. And so I think everybody has, I mean, relationships are going to be what triggers you anyway. That's
Yeah.
with different people, different
Well,
people, different
what's
backgrounds.
interesting, you're hitting on something there that I this idea of curiosity versus judgment. My clients hear that to the point of exhaustion, and if they're listening, they're probably going, "Okay, here he goes." And my
Yeah.
ode to Walt Whitman, because it's so
Oh, yes.
unbelievably true. But some out there might say, "Well, Hattie, I just can't go to that particular shadow. I just can't. I can't." I always advocate if you're finding a struggle to do it on your own, there's help, right? And there's different levels of help, and
Yeah.
you'll determine what you need, whether it be clinical or else. But I think the idea of being curious about the shadow is a pathway to healing
Mhm.
versus judgment, because I've encountered a lot of people that, I mean, they're like the judge, jury, and prosecutor
Right.
all in one.
Mhm.
You shouldn't have done that. And if you would have done this, then you wouldn't have to deal with that. And the
Mhm.
funny thing about that, Hattie, that that speaks to every single human being on the planet.
Yeah.
All of us
All
could
of
can say, "Yep, I'm in that tribe." But what
Right.
I find is that there's a resistance there, and I think sometimes that block is that we're so quick to run to judgment and not be curious enough to go, well, wait a minute. Yes, okay, I acknowledge. Yeah, that was a suboptimal decision. But let's
Mhm.
look at what might have been behind the decision. Let's look at what was I going through? What was happening in my world at that time? That
Right.
seems, because then you're not on the hook for something that you made a mistake in. So that's a long way around to say, what role has curiosity played in this journey for you?
Eric, I am the real life Curious George. I, I, I'm not even kidding. That has been a joke that I
I've
have.
got this vision in my head, Hattie, of when my son was like 4 and we would watch that before he would go to preschool. That's so awesome. Sorry, I know that's not where you were going, but I
Well,
couldn't
no, because
resist.
that is where it started actually, because my mom, if there's one thing that she loved to always tell me is that, oh, you just love to read Curious George. I would read it to you over and over and over again. And then I became a reporter and she was surprised. And I was like, Mom, you read me that book, like those books over and over again. And I still
Right.
like reading some of them today because they really are empowering and they remind you that it's good to
That's,
learn and good to question things. And like when you're curious, you can make a difference rather than when you judge and you just shut it down. Um,
yeah.
so we have a judgment and a shame epidemic where
Hmm.
we don't feel like we can be flawed, even though it's in our human design to be flawed. we have like our emotional intelligence was meant to grow as we got older. So we were meant to make mistakes
It's
that
the
we're
only
not
way.
going to be proud of. You never have to be proud
Yeah.
of your mistakes, but you do have to look at them so that you can free yourself from the pain that they cause you on an emotional level and how that translates to the physical level. I think people it's a tough concept sometimes to understand that our emotional pain does turn into physical pain. Um,
Yeah.
and so if emotional pain wasn't enough for you, if you recognize that you don't want a chronic illness, you don't want to have this chronic pain, and you want to have better relationships with people and you want to have a fuller life, you have to be willing to look at yourself and then also tell yourself that it's okay that this happened. You did the best that you could at the time with what you had. And you could even
Yeah.
go further as it actually makes sense that you responded this way because, and then you go into the process of the things that also led up to that decision. And so then you understand why your brain worked the way that it did and why you've gotten to the point where you are now. It's a long journey and it's a difficult one, but the one thing that I always try to hit home is that shame has no place. It has no place here. Like I'm not here to make you feel shame. There's nothing that you can tell me that would think less of you. It will lead to me asking you more questions about your adverse life experiences for you to
Yeah.
have gotten to that point in your life, but I'm not going to make you feel bad for that thing that happened years ago that is still plaguing your mind and preventing you from living the life that you deserve now.
And you know what, Hattie? One of the most powerful questions, and I happened upon it by accident, that I've asked friends, family, clients, is what do you need most from you?
Mhm.
And the idea of that was driven by, if we're not careful, um, that judgment that is so easy to go to is the very thing that keeps us from moving to breakthrough. So, for
Mhm.
example, think of it this way. If I said, Hattie, what does Hattie need most from Hattie right now? Maybe she would say, I need her not to judge me. I need her to let me know that it's okay that I made the mistake. Right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Eric, what does Eric need most from you?
Mhm.
You don't have to be Superman. It's okay. You can let somebody else sleep over that building. You can just rest.
Yes.
Because if we're not careful, again, I think we're so driven, and maybe that's part of living in the United States and our culture, you know,
Mhm.
and you got to ask the question. It's like, okay, so what is all that for?
Right.
All that striving, all that, I'm going to work myself. Because even I think about this, like, in certain times of our lives, we always hear about retirement, right? What are you doing for retirement? How much have you saved for retirement? And this audience has heard me kind of opine a little bit about this before, Hattie, but it is not my call to ignore saving and investing your money. You should.
Right. You're like,
You should do that.
yeah.
But
You
think
should.
about it. If our pursuits in the process, right, in those pursuits, is to accumulate for a day out, way out in the future potentially,
Mhm.
and we're working ourselves to the bone. We're burning relationships in the process. And let's say we do get to that quote magical finish line. What will
Mhm.
we have? What what
Right.
will what will we be like?
Yeah.
And again, not advocating that you stop investing and saving. I'm not advocating that you don't work and try to earn a good living, if not a great living. I'm just saying, shouldn't there be some level of like self respect that says, hold on, I no, I'm not going to kill myself for this. I'll work hard, I'll give, but not to the point of sacrificing my. And I think that kind of where I align it with that question. Because I think maybe if we ask that question more often, we might be a little better to ourselves. right?
Yes, I 100% agree. And I even like would go a step further and say, because, you know, having been in journalism, I understand the different kinds of people and what they require in order to believe if something is true or not. And
Hmm.
some people, like, they're more comfortable with hearing something and being like, that makes sense. That makes
Right.
sense. Yes. And then there are others who are more skeptical, and that's their brain chemical makeup, whatever, and their life experience that got to them to that point. And so in journalism, you have to, a lot of times data and sometimes hard facts are required. And when it comes to the neuroscience behind mindfulness, it
Hmm.
shows that you need more rest, you need more presence, more now in order to produce all of the things that your mind wants to produce. To reach your goals, you have to be here first and also be responsible. Because
Yes.
being here will require you to be responsible.
Yeah.
Because we don't not have anxiety ever. If there's something that needs to be done that impacts your safety, which is financial, it is emotional, it is physical, it is several different things, but
Yeah.
financial is part of that. If you don't have your financials in at least like a good enough order, that's going to impact your sense of safety. And then the anxiety starts. And then then the spiral begins. And so
Yeah.
like when you work too hard and you just continue to work yourself to the bone, you're not accessing your creativity at all. You
Isn't it
are,
interesting?
yeah.
I mean, the dynamic of that, and we've done a number of shows on creativity, but what you just said is really on mark, and it kind of takes me to this place of, you alluded to it about inflammation just a few minutes ago, and this
Yeah.
idea about what chronic disease and how it can come up, and
Hmm.
and there are studies, right, about the impact of stress and that
Right.
inflammation and what it does, right? And I think sometimes, maybe the average person says, "Well, Hattie, I just have this project deadline. That's all it is. Yeah, I know that I feel this tension in the back of my neck, and I'm not sleeping as well, but I got to get this project done because this is on the line, that's on the line." And I'm going, it's like we don't even realize this erosion that's happening right underneath our nose.
Hmm.
And I get it because I used to be in that place to say,
Hmm.
well, what else would you expect me to do, Eric? I've got to do this, right? And I'm going, who said you had to do it? Who is that person? My gut says it might be potentially like me. It wasn't a person, it was
Yeah.
a system that said, you should, you
Hmm.
must, you have to.
Yep.
And if I questioned, well, why is that? Because you must, because you have to. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right. Instead of really seeking productivity from like, just people in general, we more so go to seek to control what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so that we can feel comfortable and confident in what's being done. I think control is also a really big issue when it comes to this. Like, I mean, because the topic of hybrid work, the topic of whether you can go into the office like full time, if that's going to be the best thing, if you need to map out exactly what you're doing at every moment of the day and making sure that every moment of it is full. And then the rise of AI now, for some reason, giving people more work versus freeing them up for creativity. It doesn't, it doesn't make sense to us because we already know that at least from our own personal lived experiences, that
Yeah.
that's not going to get the most out of us. That's not going to bring that creativity that can really build a business and help to make it thrive in a certain way. It's just going to keep it chugging along, and
Yeah.
it keeps us all in um, this place where we're just working, coming home, maybe exercising, making dinner, putting the kids to bed, going to sleep. And that's not really how we were supposed to live. And that's not really helping anybody to access or benefit from each other's gifts because we all have special gifts. We won't be able to access them with a faulty nervous system.
Yeah. You got me thinking as well. You mentioned control, and this is maybe an area that many find most difficult because I don't know about you, Hattie, but it seems like in the age we're living in now, disruption, change is just it's coming rapid fire. And
Mhm.
there's very few of those things that you and I or our audience could actually do to change it, right? And I kind of want to go down this path of the idea of circumstances and finding pathways for happiness and joy. And I've kind of used the analogy at previous times about the transcendent life, right? And I'm going to do the poor job because I can't draw and I'm probably not going to be very good with my hand gestures, but hopefully you're going to understand where I'm going. So if you could imagine there's this line, and for our audience, if you're not watching the video, just imagine there's this line in the center of the page. Okay, and let's say that's the time continuum, right? Below the line are all the circumstances of life, right? Disappointments, heartaches, great successes, losses, fill in the blank with the circumstances. And they're always moving in various levels. Above the line is the transcendent life, all right? And you and I are standing at that line at the continuum, right? And I do believe a lot of it has to do with choice. It's hard and it's hard choices, right? But I find one of my great pursuits is how can I live the transcendent life? Meaning I live above that line, even though those circumstances are happening all the time. And
Right.
don't misunderstand me, Hattie. I'm not saying that those circumstances of life never hit me, right? Because they do. Because that line of for the time continuum is really rather imaginary, right? And I can think about my own life in the last probably 18 months, going close to 2 years of all kinds of loss, all kinds of disappointment, all kinds of circumstances, things I never expected, never, I mean, would have imagined, nightmarish things. But here's what's interesting. I found that in order to live that transcendent life, certainly my relationship with God an essential part, if
Yeah.
not the bedrock foundational part. But the choice thing, which is open to every human being, regardless of their faith, is what will I choose in the midst of my circumstance? I don't have to like it. I can say, Hattie, I'm frustrated by this, but I have a choice.
Mhm.
The transcendent life says you have a choice to find and choose happiness.
Mhm.
You can decide that, you know what, Hattie, these three things went wrong this week, but here are four things that went right. And I
Right.
can do that every week of my life. And that's that transcendent life. Now, that's a bit of a story. That's kind of my thing. What are some, and maybe one story, time is never on our side doing a show. But can you think of maybe a personal story of maybe, and let's stay in the optimistic and the inspiring that has helped you, something that you had a breakthrough in or that helped you immensely?
Oh my gosh. The thing is, I feel like I have breakthroughs all the time. To some degree, I'm like, okay, like, when is it? But it's always a relief once you get there. When you
Yep.
have the breakthrough, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm here. It's okay. Everything's all right. Mine is like yours. It's very faith-based.
Hmm.
That has been the strongest reminder that like life was never promised to not have suffering in it. It
Yeah.
wasn't, it wasn't promised that we wouldn't suffer. It wasn't promised that we wouldn't have flaws and that we wouldn't sin. We wouldn't do things that aren't good for us. And not that we wouldn't self-sabotage, like we have the capability to do all of these things. And that is just like who we are just because we're here. And
Yeah.
sometimes just I have to listen to the music because I have many moments, and like thinking about a specific one, I could even just think yesterday. I mean just yesterday, because
Yeah.
I'm constantly processing things. I'm in a relationship now after several that didn't necessarily serve me, and several that I didn't have the emotional knowledge that I do now. I just didn't
Wow.
have it. And so, I've been learning it, and I do feel like you have to be in a relationship again to totally get it, because you're going to be triggered a lot. And I kind of have
Was
this.
that, can I ask you? I'm
Yeah,
interrupting you, but
no,
you
sure.
just said something. Was that scary for you to go to try again?
Oh my gosh. Yes. When I got on a dating app the first day, I literally I had to throw my phone down. I was on it for like maybe 20 minutes, and I was like, I can't, I'm too overwhelmed. I'm like,
Right.
I had to tell
Yeah.
myself, I'm like, well, Hattie, you don't have to do this if you're not ready. That's the beauty of it.
Yep.
You don't have to if you're not ready. You think you're getting ready. You're just not quite there yet, and that's okay. And so what
Yeah,
I did,
and you just kind of and it's not my question, right?
yeah,
That question of what does Hattie need most from Hattie, you just described it.
yeah.
You gave
I,
her that, hey, it's okay.
yep.
You don't have to. That's just beautiful. Anyway, that's a tangent. But anyway,
The
keep
first
going.
thing I do. It's the first thing I do. It's like, wait a second. You have a right to your emotions. Let's think about what this emotion is. We'll identify it if we don't know what it is right now, because sometimes I don't know. And that's
Sure.
part of trauma. And that's a weird thing for people to understand. They're like, you don't know how you feel. I'm like, I can tell you that I'm real overwhelmed right now because there's a lot going on in my head, and it's in a different direction. So the best thing for me is to calm myself down by talking to myself, listen to calming music, possibly doing a meditation. Really depends on how heightened or how triggered my nervous system is.
So you have levels of tools, right? Depending on the how heightened. Did
It
I get
really
that right?
depends on yes. So I stick with Christian music for some levels, and then when I'm ready to empower myself, I mean, I myself am at least two Taylor Swift albums. If you listen to them, you'd be like, "Oh, okay, so that's Hattie's life. Cool. All right." So I don't, T Swift, who knew?
Yeah.
But I like listen to it, or like different artists. Sia is great for empowerment and for
Mhm.
bringing you out of like a funk and reminding you. I love one of her songs. It's called Floating Through Space, and it's you made it through another day. um Everything's going to be okay. We're all just floating through space. That's
Interesting.
all we're doing.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it's like, all right, none of all of these things that are so emotionally bogging you or me down
Hmm.
are really that big. We don't need as much as we think we need. It's far simpler than that.
Yeah. So I don't want to get too far ahead of you and what your plans are for your guest hosting of our show, but I gotta believe you're going to touch on some things that may be connected to what I'm about ready to ask you. So I think there might be those in the audience that would say, well, Hattie, that's really good that you've got these great strategies, that you've gone through a lot and you're getting breakthroughs, but I'm not sure how that works. I'm not sure. So, what would you say to someone in the audience that might be in that place as far as support, tools, support, resources,
Mm.
at least to help them get on the road of like, okay, I want to be that healthier version, that better version, whatever it may be?
It can be super simple.
Hmm.
And I think it even just starts. I love to quote just like movies, music, all the things,
Hmm.
because the messages are out there. And the one thing
Yeah.
that I loved about Frozen 2, the movie came out as I was starting my divorce, and I had my 3-month-old baby and my was he 3 years old? And my 3-year-old son. So my
Hmm.
daughter and my son. And he just would break into the song The Next Right Thing. And when and I couldn't help but listen to it and just kind of cry as I'm watching him. I'm like, look at him. He's like just in his own little world, just loving life. And he has no idea that the song that he's singing is speaking to
Mm,
me in such a way that I will always remember him, his voice singing it, belting
yeah.
it out. And I would say for anyone who knows that life isn't what they want it to be, you just start with this moment right now. What is the next right thing? This morning for me, it was literally turning right at the stoplight and then left at the next because I was processing something. My daughter had to go to school and I still have to
Mhm.
do all my responsibilities. Um, but when you get into that overwhelm, and not everybody has complex PTSD, so I'm
Sure.
giving you kind of
Yeah.
extremes.
Hmm.
Um, I think in my personal opinion, I think there are probably plenty of women who can relate to this. They just don't quite know because I think there's a level of trauma, at least what I've seen from my own friends growing up and coworkers and things that they've gone through. And I'm like, you have been through the ringer. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I am not a clinician to tell anybody that they have PTSD, but I can see myself in a lot of people and in a lot of women. And there's a
Hmm.
level of, we're not talking about things that we've experienced. And I think men, honestly, same boat. It's just when we talk about biologically speaking, I think there is a level of safety that men may have slightly more than women because we know that our stature is different. We know that like we are
Yeah.
biologically different. And that's not meant to make anybody upset. That's just really what
It's biology.
is said.
Well, and
So I
Hattie, I
think,
can speak from the male perspective, um, and it's dangerous. We've, and again, my opinion,
yeah,
we've been taught culturally that we can perform our way out.
right.
We can win, we can achieve, we can conquer. And on the face of it, it sounds really, really good, right? Because it's kind of like a football game.
Hmm.
Time runs out, we're ahead by 20 points, we win.
Yeah.
But nobody talks a lot about, well, what about when they're sweeping up all the confetti and the lights have now been turned off? What then? And I
Yeah.
know from my own personal experience, I found that was a very lonely, empty time and
Hmm.
a time of understanding that there needs to be more. And part of what you were saying about talking about it, I was fortunate. I had people around me, not all men, but the majority of them, who I could talk to and I could say, this doesn't make any sense to me, that they were supportive, you know? And I would dare say that I think it's important, no matter your sex, to have a community that can go, oh, and quite frankly, selfishly, Hattie, one of the big reasons why we reached out to you about what we're doing with you and your company is because if it means that there's a woman out there or women who go, that's me. That's
Hmm.
yeah, that's me. She
Yeah.
understands. Because
Yeah.
you mentioned music. One of the most powerful things about music for me, especially when I go back to when I was at my youngest, it was as if those musical artists knew my name and knew what I was feeling and could understand.
Hmm.
And though obviously, Hattie, we're not playing music on the Spirit of EQ podcast,
We
I
can get some
hope
flown in the
I was going to
background at
say,
some
right? Right.
point.
Um, but even in just this simple format of having a conversation that maybe someone would go, they get me.
Yeah.
That, I mean, how powerful. So,
Yeah.
as I mentioned, time is not our friend, and we're getting close to closing out the show today. Um, Is it too early to ask you what are some of the things that you want to get out there into the world? And obviously, you're not a permanent guest host, but we're going to have you on more than a few times, right? To do a show. What are some of the things you're hoping that you're going to be able to do with that?
I am I really want to create a level of compassion around flaws, around the emotions that come from that. I want cancel culture to be done, because it is not serving anyone to just disregard something, or discard someone for a mistake that they've made. That's not, we are all human beings.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're in a space where we forget that. We're of we're all people. We may have differences, but and we were made by like the same creator. I mean, that's
Yeah.
my opinion. And I think people need to get more comfortable with connecting again, since we've experienced such a disconnect over a period of time. But then COVID was a big changer. It
Yeah.
had its blessings, and it's had its trauma responses.
Yeah.
And if anything, I want people to realize and really focus on what could their trauma be from their childhood, from their teen years, and from work, anything. What are those experiences that have changed your behavior, changed who you are at your core? Um,
Mhm.
and I want people to be um, better with connecting with others and sharing their authenticity, because when you can share authentically, you feel so much better.
Yeah.
No one wants to hold their skeletons, or just, I use skeletons even that because we talk about skeletons being in the closet. I don't really see them as being necessarily skeletons. I think we all have those things that honestly probably made us feel like we were dead inside, like made us feel as if
Hmm.
everything was crashing down, and we had to absolutely hide it at all costs. But when you hide all of these things, then everyone else is going to hide their things. And then we're never going to know, we're never going to learn, we're never going to realize that certain things aren't okay, certain behavior, certain communication. We're not going to understand manipulation. We're not going to understand gaslighting. We're not going to understand all of these things that get us into this headspace that the majority of us are in, because we all have a nervous system. A household, a family has their own nervous system. When I am off, my kids are off. And then a community, it has its nervous system. If everybody's up in an uproar, well, the community is off balance. And it goes all the way to the country. We
Yeah.
just went through a massive rupture in human history. And right now we're not repairing it, because we're not focusing on this, like, just small piece of our body that actually controls a lot of who we are. And
Yeah.
I would say that that's
Boy.
the nervous system. So my big thing is sounding the alarm on trauma and how that actually impacts you in your everyday.
Awesome. Awesome. So, for our audience, look for Hattie's shows coming up soon. We're working still on some details and dates and all that stuff, but we're super excited, Hattie, that you've decided to honor us with guest hosting. And this conversation was great. And I still have things in my notes. I'm going, I want to ask her about that. So, Hattie, that's the sort of the code for you have to come back and do another show with me.
Well, I was gonna say, I know no story of mine is ever short. It's like my insurance. He has to bring me back.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, once again, thanks for appearing and coming on. And for our audience, we look forward to the next time that we're together. Take care.